If you want more interviews, this is for you. What you really want is to get interviews and get invited back, right? I mean, this the second date that matters. But wait, if you're scared to death about an interview, this is still an episode for you. Because, girl, there's no better, faster way to increase your reach than an interview or you talking to many people, which we used to talk about as a speech. But there are some live events now coming back, but there's still a lot of people wanting digital. I mean, it saved money, although we're all crazy craving community. One way to increase your leverage, even if you are an introvert, is to do a podcast because it feels like you're talking to one, but it will go out to many. I'm Deborah Atkinson. You're listening to She Means Fitness Business. It's a division of Voice for Fitness, where we know that you want to be an inspirational example to midlife women. In order to do that, you need a profitable health and fitness coaching business. And the problem is a lack of clients or a lack of revenue because you're charging too little, which makes you feel uncertain about whether you can actually succeed as a business. And we believe you deserve consistent, dependable revenue from clients that you love. And I understand exactly how it feels to be where you are because I've been there too, which is why I now train fitness professionals internationally. Here's how I do it. We first start getting you clients consistently. Number two, we keep those clients and increase the rate of revenue you get from each one. And number three, we start celebrating along the way, not just when you've doubled or tripled your revenue or you've made that first $5,000 a month every month for the first 90 days, but we celebrate the little wins because you know what it's like when a client wants to lose weight. They won't see the scale change as fast as they'll improve their sleep, get more energy, stop their cravings, and have to stop and think about that and realize, I am on the right path. And I will remind you, you are as well. So you can book a call, but first I want you in the meantime to get the Health and Fitness Professionals Scorecard. So you can stop feeling like your dream is slipping away while you watch other, less qualified, less heart-centered coaches make sales and get more clients. And instead, you easily can increase your revenue by at least $5,000 a month in 90 days. And if you're way over and above that, you should be able to expect at least a 25% increase in your revenue by the end of the year. All right, let's talk about this. Interviews and getting up in front of people, a one-to-many model. So much better than meeting one-on-one, don't you think? But there's a trick to doing this, whether it's local or regional or national media, a podcast to your niche. Interviews are gold. This episode is essentially part 2, though, of a 2-parter, but maybe 3. You could twist my arm because what you really need to know is how to get booked more often so you can show off these new skills. So, okay, we just did it. I gave me a little homework. I gave myself some homework just now. And that's an additional episode because you've got to know how to get booked. So the first episode I gave you is get a makeover for that bio. Your bio is boring. And I say that too often to people, but it's like shaking a limp noodle hand in a reception line. Nobody wants to do that. Nobody. So you're not being delicate, polite. No. Stop it right now. Get a firm handshake. Get a firm introduction that you are proud of, one that makes you sit up and say, yes, I did that. I'm doing that right now. And here's why you need to listen to me. That's how you should feel when you read your own bio or hear somebody read it for you. Oh, yeah, it's a reminder. That's who I am. Yes, let's do this. So the third part of this part 3 will be how do you get booked more? Because by then you're going to be ready, my friends. So in this one, we're going to talk about how do you do a great interview. Let's say you got booked, you get that introduction down. You want to have somebody listening, maybe invite you back, if not invited back, to the same podcast. Because look, if I just had you on my podcast, you may have been awesome. And I'd say, I'd love to have you back, but I don't mean next week, right? I mean, maybe 6 months or a year, we'd have you back because we'll revisit topics again. And if I loved you, let's do that too. All right. Part 1 was all about your introduction or bio. If you haven't listened to that one, you need to go and do that. We just did it. It's not the first time that I've shared that type of content about not being boring. In fact, I've got an entire worksheet and another episode that deep dives into how to stop being boring and stand out with your introduction or bio. And I'll tell you this, it's not just because you're new at it. Experienced professionals make this mistake of boring bio too. Doctors have never been taught this. Some of the weakest introductions that I've had are among fitness professionals who are solo entrepreneurs and doctors who are new to PR, public relations, and marketing to promote themselves. They just aren't used to doing it, and maybe rely a little bit too heavily on where they did their undergraduate and their doctorate and their residency. And really that doesn't matter. And it's just a lot of maybe words and space that give people a chance to tune out that you could skip over. I think it was Stephen King in his book on writing that said, I try to leave out the parts people skip over. Something like that. But you get the idea. I mean, if it's not important, it's not a detail that is key, leave it out. Okay. So in part 3, again, I'll talk about how to get invited in the first place to speak in front of people. Like, you're not going to get asked to dance until you get dressed up and you go to the dance. You're going to have to get asked. You're not going to get asked if you're finding ways to tell people unless you tell them you have something to talk about. Boy, I fumbled that. Should we try that again? You're not going to get asked to dance unless you get dressed and go to the dance. You're also not going to get asked to speak unless you're finding ways to tell people you have something to talk about. So much better. And let me just tell you what I just did. And I could cut that out, right? I am the podcast host. I can edit, but I didn't. And this is something that's is okay. So number 1, it's okay that you don't say things perfectly. A lot of people, I think, when they go on stage, a podcast or an interview, are worried about, what if I say the wrong thing? What if you do? Does that never happen to you when you're talking to your kids, or when you're talking to your pets, or you're calling your kids your pets' names, right? Or in real life, this happens all the time. And it's okay. It doesn't have to be perfect, because you have the ability. Number 1, there's 2 of you there. There's a host who might say, clarify that for a minute, because I thought you just said. And then it's an opportunity. It's just a conversation. They're not trying to nail you and prove you wrong and embarrass you. They're on your side. They got you to the podcast. They want you to do well. So please remember that. Anybody who hosts a podcast wants you to shine while you're on it, because you shining makes them shine. And if their audience wins from your content, they win too. So realize everybody's behind you, but you do have to let people know you have something to talk about. Be memorable. What does that mean? Be remarkable, or better yet, retweetable. At one point, that was the word, but seriously, who's on Twitter today? Maybe you are. I'm actually on it. I just don't do anything there. You have to be able to talk in what we call sound bites. So the being remarkable or retweetable is like, oh, that's catchy. That's something I'll remember. And it's something that makes people who remember it sound cool. Like, this is it. This is a reminder. Like, I hear people in our community repeating to me, restore before more. In fact, I think somebody just reached out in our support box and said, I purchased this, but I never used it, and I can't find my link to get to it. I was going through a traumatic time, and I, had to restore before more. Could you point me in the right direction? I'm like, very good. Nicely done. I see what you did there. But that's what you want. You want people repeating back to you exactly, right, what you said. I distinctly remember I was on stage, and the keynote, of course, I remember because this was the last keynote I did on stage at a live event before the pandemic, and then everything shut down in San Diego. And there were a couple women in the audience, and they, in fact, came up to me afterward because I had a booth outside of the auditorium and just spoke to me a little bit and said, that resonated with me so much. Well, the next morning, after my keynote, as I often do, I'll do a breakout session or something else. And in this particular event, I offered to do a workout. And they already had yoga going on. So I did a kickboxing workout. And so I was coming back up to my room after the kickboxing workout, and I ran into these two ladies smelling far better than I did, already dressed like they were going to or coming from breakfast. And I walked down the hall and I said, "Hey, ladies," I said, "I missed you this morning." And they turned right around and they said, "Well, we had to restore before more," because I had said that in my speech. And there they were, less than, 12 hours later, repeating it to me. Exactly what you want, right? That stuck with them. Now, I'm not sure that quite went the way I saw it going, but you know what I mean? So you want to be retweetable, remarkable, whatever your word is, but that is talking in sound bites. Restore before more. Why do you like it? Well, it rhymes. It's got alliteration. It's in like iambic rhythm. Da 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 da. Restore before more. And that is easily memorable. We have 10 tenets at Flipping 50, and many of them have that. Another one, and you can't take these because they are trademarkable, but another one is intense early, light late. The alliteration helps it be memorable. You're looking for something in a little soundbite, and it may not be that. It just may be a quote about science, but you can't go on for sentences. So definitely no one wants a yes or no response when they're giving an interview. They want you to say yes if it's a yes or no question, but they want you to say yes. And let me explain or give an example. And they want you to go on talking. So most really good hosts will not ask you very many close answered questions like yes or no questions unless they have a backup question they have prepared. Now, a novice host, and you may get booked on more of those when you get started, they will ask too many of those. And then it's like, okay, next question, right? But you hope that your host will embellish. So that's not much of a conversation. If it's just, I ask you a question, yes. I ask you another question, no, right? Unless it's set up to be a game like that. I'm going to give you a resource, and this is something I will put in the show notes too, but there is a book by my good friend and colleague, Sam Horn, and she is, I don't even have a title for her except for unicorn, wizard, one of kind. You want her in your back pocket. And if it's a book and that's as close as you can come, do it. If you ever have an opportunity to hear her speak, watch it and take notes and go again. I have repeated many of her talks. I've heard her say them once. They never get old, but she has story after story and quote after quote, and she talks in story. It's memorable. And when you come away from an hour with her, you will write better, speak better, and you will be more memorable. So buy that book, Pop, and you will see exactly what I mean. Sound bites. The book will help you with that sound bite as well. Sound bites allow you to be both readable, so you'll be remembered, and to pause. Both are important. So like you saying no and yes is not great. You also don't want to ramble. Like if you keep going on and you're so excited about your topic and you're talking kind of like this, if I kept talking like this, it would be really hard for my show host to interrupt me because I'm just kind of going on in a ramble and I'm not really leaving anything. And what will happen if I were the show host and I'm having a guest like that, it makes me as the host appear rude because I'm interrupting essentially. If you never take a pause, and in fact, many guests, and I have done this before, I will say, okay, let me pause for a minute. Does that make sense? Do you have any questions? I'm gonna let you insert something here, you know, because your host knows their audience better than you know their audience. Don't try to pretend otherwise. They're the expert. They invited you to come on. So treat them like that and with respect as if they're running the show. You're just a part of the circus today. And you need to have that element of kind of humble attitude. Okay. So, what are your sound bites? Try to write some of them down. Most likely, your host is going to repeat your soundbite if you say one. If I say restore before more, I love that. She'll say, restore before more. That makes sense, right? Your audience hears it again. Big win. These are the things that come to be the best social media memes, in fact. So, what are good sound bites? What are yours? Write them down. Maybe you already have some. Maybe you need to start collecting them. What are things that people hear you say regularly? It might even be things you tell your family members. Maybe you myth bust things like no pain, no gain, as I do. My sound bite is no pain, no gain, no way. Or no pain, no gain, no brain. That's what I say. Meaning that is stupid. Right? These are two of mine. Now, you want to steal that? I'm going to know it probably, but like minds think alike, so I'll never know. I don't like SMART goals. I call SMART goals dumb. That's a soundbite right there. So I would need to have a pregnant pause after that because a show host potentially is going to say, really? Say more about that because everybody else says SMART goals and then they come on and they teach SMART goals. And I'm going to come on in January and be contrary to everything else. Who's the more interesting interview? Yep, me. And it's not because I'm doing that just to be arbitrary to get attention. It's truly, I think that. So you can't just pull false moves where this is something you're doing just because, oh, this makes you unique. It's got to be for real. I mean, be authentic, be transparent. Now, your sound bites don't have to rhyme, but yes, it's nice. They could be just rhythmic. They could have alliteration, like the 10 tenets of Flipping 50. I teach our students and I teach to our professional students of the Flipping 50 Menopause Fitness Specialist course. For instance, intense early, light late, or restore before more, just to review those. So if you like me, let me know this. I'll teach you the rest and why we do it. So I gave you 2, there were 10. I will teach you the rest of the Flipping 50 tenets if you're curious about that and you are working with women and you're not on the inside. And we share these regularly and they're a part of our core values and tenets like the 10 commandments. But listen, keep a list of subjects, titles, and sound bites. I would start a spreadsheet or maybe you keep things in a Google Doc, whatever you want to do. But make sure you can go back to this frequently when you're going to do an episode with somebody. Go back and review these things. You might put them under different topics. Like maybe you talk about strength training. Maybe you talk about cardio. Maybe you talk about heart health. And you have some of these sound bites that you could use for this or that, or maybe they apply to all. But you have lots of ways you can organize yourself so you're ready to go and review. Plus, these are your treasure chest of social media lives when it's just you and it's time to go on. You can just look at that. And if you haven't done it for a while, you can always do it again. For great examples of great interviews, register for the What, the When, and the Why exercise for Women 40 and Over Summit. Not only will you get 40 examples of how to knock it out of the park on your next interview. You'll get insight into how to help women in midlife balance their hormones with your help. So I'll put the link in the show notes for that as well. During your interview, you want to make sure you pause. Mentioned that above, right? Having that retweetable, your soundbite will give you an opportunity to pause. But if you get anything right, get this right. I've had 2 guests on my podcast during 10 years of hosting, 2 unique podcasts. That means 2 shows a week. And I've published at least 1 a week since the beginning, 2 a week now of each. That's 4 podcasts a week. It's a lot of podcasts. 2 guests, just 2 out of all those stand out as I cringe when someone comes on because she's a runaway horse. She'll start talking and she won't pause. The interview I've done with her was an hour long. It didn't need to be. There was just too much information, too much overwhelm, and it wasn't fun to have a guest come on and just rant like that. In fact, I think I was able to text my staff during that. I mean, without missing a beat, because she just kept going, no matter how good her content is or yours as a guest, and how much I want to have her again. Twice might be enough, because though warned on the second time, like, this is just a 30-minute show, she did it again in the second show we were on together. The second guest that I can recall not being a favorite was not even an acquaintance of mine, and he did something familiar or very similar. I didn't air that one because I felt it was just a runaway horse. It was a waste of time. Hadn't done his homework actually about my show, the philosophies, what we do and what we don't talk about. And so that was just a waste of my time prepping, waste of my time interviewing. And then same for them. I mean, your time is worthwhile too. So be sure that you do your homework. Remember that as a guest, you're there to serve, and you serve the host. Second, you serve the audience. And sometimes there's a third party, depending on who booked you. Let's say you're doing a speech, or maybe it's a PR agency who booked you, that you're paying to do that. However, if you do a bad job, makes their job really hard to book you again. If you do a good job, every interview you have can help you leverage more. Let me give you an example of wearing different hats in an interview or presentation. Say you're booked for a panel interview. There's an organization probably paying for the event somehow. There may be a meeting planner whose job hinges on you making them look good for her boss. And there are audience members that everybody wants to benefit, but your consideration has to be, who hired me? Who's paying the bill, right? And what is the outcome do they want for this event? So while you are juggling all of those things, you have to remember who hired you. And you need to really honor them. That is my belief. So yes, they put you up in front of it, but you can't just go off on your own tangent with your own politics. Remember who's paying you and whose job hinges on this. Make them look good and then deliver. When you do get interviews with somebody, if you might run over with the host without doing your homework and knowing what they promote and what they stand against, what do they want you to talk about during this interview? What do they not want you to talk about during this interview? If you don't do your homework, you won't be asked again, and the interview might never air. So ask questions if you're not sure. Say, where would you like me to go with this? Are there any topics you don't talk about? Many times there is like a style guide or a brand guide. Like, here's our audience. Most of them think this. They come to us for this. Here's what we do want to talk about. Here's what we don't. We have talked about this topic several times. Please be sure to review some of those previous episodes and make sure we've got a different angle. Here's our suggestions. These are the things we'd like you to talk about. So I will give some very strong suggestions as a host, but you are ideally going to provide suggested questions. You want to help your host look good. Confirm that you're on the same page. Don't give generic questions if you've talked about doing something very specific. So when someone books a podcast with me, this is pretty traditional with all the podcasts that I've been on. There are a couple anomalies, but those anomalies, by the way, are things that podcast show hosts who charge $3,000 to be a guest on a show host. So it's a very different model. But what you want to make sure you're doing is reading over the notes. If you got contacted, say, through a DM in Instagram over a post, and I've done this before. So I reach out to certain people and I say, hey, I would love to do a podcast with you about that post. Let's talk about this, this, and this. Great. I will give them the link. They will book. But sometimes it's not them booking. Maybe it's an EA, executive assistant, and they put standard questions, not the topic at all that I talked about. Don't be that person. Unless you're extremely big like Oprah, don't do it because you don't have a staff. You don't have that excuse. Make sure that if you've been asked to be on a show for a certain content, that's the content that you give them. Nothing bothers me more when I say, here's what I want. And most often this happens with a third party when there's a PR agency working or even an executive assistant working to get someone booked, and they probably get paid commission on more bookings. And then they ignore the reason that you're doing this podcast. And you have to go back and say, hey, these questions are not what we agreed about before we invited so-and-so to be on the podcast. Is she still okay with the topic that we want? Here were the questions we agreed on. That, though, just took 20 more minutes out of my day that I didn't have to give. I don't have 20 minutes sitting around in a bank saying, here you go. Here you can have some. Got more than enough. And I'm sure you don't either. So make sure that you are giving the questions based on that. Don't give generic questions if you've talked about doing something specific. And don't do this. I can go any direction. You can ask me anything. I've had people put that in their questions you'd like Deborah to ask you. I don't want that because I don't know what your real expertise is. I don't want the limp fish handshake. I want the definitive, why are you the expert in this deep niche that we're talking about? Because if you're just broad and you can talk about anything, I'm guessing I'm going to have regrets about having you be a guest on this show. So give some direction. Say, this is my book. This is what I deep dive into in my book, or give something very concrete. The bigger you are, the more this is true that, somebody else is going to probably be entering all of the data for you. Just make sure if you hand something off and it's been about a DM, that they know what that was about, because you'll honor them much, much more. If you're interviewing up, so to speak, meaning you're interviewing on a bigger podcast platform than you are right now, it's your job to hand the speaker questions that may be good to ask. When I ask somebody for an interview as a host, I've usually seen them posting about something like I described. So I'm going to be very clear that this is what I want to talk about, and I'll begin drafting the show notes based on that. I did this for my summit, like every one of those 39 guests. I said, I would love to have you talk about this specifically. I don't want you to come and talk about be a runaway horse talking about your area of expertise. We're talking about specific to exercise, gut health, specific to exercise, blood sugar, specific to exercise, chronic fatigue. So I was very specific with each and every guest, what I wanted from them. And there was just probably one or two that kind of got off on a tangent that I had to bring it back in and circle back and rope them. So you've got to be prepared, I don't want to send out one of those, hey, this isn't quite what we agreed on. Is it still okay that we do this XXX? That's what we talked about. So do your homework. You will make your host love you. the less you make her work or him. So if I've talked about something, and inordinately, I have talked about many, many things, 1,000 podcast episodes in, there's a good chance I've talked about what your topic is. So what's your angle different when you're asking to be a guest or saying, yeah, I'd love to? Tell me why it's going to be a different angle that they've never heard before. I'll give you an example. So shout out to a friend. So recently, one of our community members, Flipping 50 fitness specialist, went through a breast cancer journey. She's on it, right? And she came on, and we've talked about breast cancer on this show before, probably at least a handful of times. How is it different? Well, it was very fresh. She's a fitness pro. And that feeling of, but I'm healthy. Like I know better. I do better, actually, and still me. So it was very fresh talking about the emotions, and she was able to do it. So it's a real gift. That was the uniqueness. Now, you don't have to have a tragic story like that, and certainly don't want anyone to have to go through that. But the angle is, some different kind of spin. That's what you're looking for. What makes this unique, even if it's a topic covered before. Now, you and I know we have lots of cookbooks on our shelf. We probably have lots of mysteries or lots of comedies or lots of romance novels, if that's what we're into. We're not going to just buy one, and we're not just going to have one podcast on a topic and then never visit it again. So it's always good to revisit. It's proof there's demand for the topic that you have. You're just looking for, how do I keep it unique and interesting? That will make all the difference in the world to you getting asked back because you've had an amazing interview. I hope that was helpful. And I want you, if you haven't listened to the first part in this podcast, please do that. But this episode, the show notes will be at fitness. That's the danger of having two podcasts, by the way. fitnessmarketingmastery.com/bio makeovers. That was the first one. This one is fitnessmarketingmastery.com/get interviews, plural, because you're going to get lots of them, and you're going to be amazing, and it's going to drive people back to your website. What are you waiting for? The world needs you now more than ever.